Not all secret societies are about power, wealth, or influence. Some hide darker truths. Truths so dangerous that if revealed, they could unravel reality itself. This is the story of one such group, the Society of the Veiled Ones, and the terrible secret they guard. For years, I had researched secret societies. Most people think of groups like the Illuminati, or maybe the Freemasons. They picture shadowy figures controlling the world from behind the scenes. But my research led me somewhere different. It started with a name. One whispered through forgotten archives and mentioned only in the darkest corners of history. The Society of the Veiled Ones. What made them different? There was no talk of world domination, no mention of wealth or influence. Instead, they were described as guardians. But guardians of what? That was the question that haunted me. For months, I combed through books, online forums, and private collections, but every trail ended the same way: vague hints, fragmented stories, nothing solid. It felt like the more I looked, the more the world itself was trying to erase their existence. Until one night. That was when everything changed. It was late. I was working alone in my small apartment, surrounded by books and notes, when I received an email. No subject line, no sender, just a single line of text. If you seek the truth, go to Black Hollow. Attached was a map. It looked ancient, yellowed with age, marking a remote village deep in the mountains. I hesitated. Something about the email felt off, like a trap, but I couldn't ignore it. I needed to know more. Against my better judgment, I packed my things and left the next day. The journey to Black Hollow was long and difficult. The village wasn't on any modern maps. My GPS lost signal long before I got close, and the roads became narrow and treacherous as the mountains loomed overhead. When I finally arrived, it felt like I had stepped back in time. Black Hollow was a place I'd never heard of before. It was like the world had forgotten it. The village was small, maybe only a dozen houses, all of them old, crumbling, as if they'd been abandoned long ago. Yet, there were still people. A few, anyway, but they weren't what I expected. The people of Black Hollow were strange. They watched me with nervous, darting eyes, whispering among themselves as I walked by. When I tried to speak to them, they quickly turned away, mumbling excuses or acting as if they couldn't understand me. It was clear they didn't want me there. I began to wonder if I'd made a mistake. If this had all been a wild goose chase. But then, just as I was about to leave, an old man approached me. He was hunched over, his face lined with age, and his eyes looked like they had seen things no one should ever see. He didn't say much at first, just stared at me with a knowing look. Then he motioned for me to follow him. "You came for them, didn't you?" he rasped. "The Veiled Ones. They're still here." I froze. This was the first real confirmation I'd heard. I followed him to the edge of the village, where he stopped and pointed towards the forest. "There's a cave, deep in the woods. That's where they keep the door." His voice was barely a whisper now. "The door they've been guarding for centuries." I asked him what door he was talking about, but he wouldn't say more. All he would tell me was that the Veiled Ones were not what people thought. They weren't protectors of secrets, they were protectors of the world. What they guard, it's not something you should find. His eyes locked onto mine, the fear in them unmistakable. "Turn back now, or you'll never be the same." But it was too late. I was already in too deep. I needed to see it for myself. The forest felt alive as I walked deeper into it. The air was thick with humidity, and every sound echoed unnaturally. The trees were old, ancient even, and they seemed to lean in, watching me. It felt like the forest itself didn't want me there. After what felt like hours, I found the cave. The entrance was hidden, almost impossible to see unless you knew where to look. And there, carved into the stone above the entrance, were symbols. Symbols I had seen before, in the books I had studied. Symbols of the Veiled Ones. I hesitated. The old man's warning echoed in my mind. But curiosity, the need for answers, it was too strong. I entered the cave. The air inside the cave was cold, unnaturally so. My footsteps echoed around me as I moved deeper, the light from my flashlight barely piercing the darkness. The walls were rough, but covered in more of those strange symbols, twisting and spiraling in patterns that made my head ache if I stared at them for too long. Then, I found it. The door. It was unlike any door I had ever seen. It stood at least 10 feet tall, made of some kind of stone I couldn't identify. The carvings on its surface depicted things. Monsters, grotesque beings with too many eyes, too many limbs. They looked like they were crawling out of the door, reaching for something, or someone. The energy around the door was wrong. The air felt heavier, thicker, like something was pressing down on me. But there was something else too. A sound, a faint humming, coming from behind the door. I should have turned back. I should have listened to the old man. But I couldn't. I had come this far. I needed to know what was on the other side. I approached the door. As I touched it, the carvings seemed to shift under my fingers, like they were alive. And then, without warning, the door opened. The darkness beyond was unlike anything I had ever seen. It wasn't just the absence of light. It was alive, pulsing, shifting. And from that darkness, something began to emerge. I can't fully describe what I saw. It was as if reality itself was breaking apart. The creatures from the carvings, they were real. Twisted, impossible beings, with bodies that defied logic. And they were watching me. I could feel their eyes on me, feel their hunger. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't listen. I was frozen, staring into the abyss, as the door opened wider and wider. I don't remember how I escaped. One moment I was staring into the void, and the next, I was outside, gasping for air. My body ached, and my mind felt fractured. But when I looked around, the village, black hollow, it was gone. The houses, the people, everything, gone. It was as if the village had never existed. I don't know how long I was out there, in the forest, before I finally found my way back to the car. But nothing has been the same since. I know now what the veiled ones were guarding. That door, it wasn't just a barrier. It was a prison for things that should never be seen. And I opened it. I can feel them, even now. Watching me, waiting. The old man was right. I've never been the same. And neither will you, if you keep searching. This isn't just a story. It's a warning. There are things in this world that are meant to stay hidden. Doors that should never be opened. If you ever hear the name, the Veiled Ones, stop. Turn back. If this story unsettled you, if it made you question what lies in the shadows, subscribe for more. There are more stories like this. Stories that will chill you to the bone. But remember, some truths are better left unknown.